Okay. Good evening, everyone. Tonight's share is always Ilu Nishmat Avi Maradover, Mered Noah Halevi, Imi Marati Rachel Badar Av Michael. And this Shabbos we have the privilege of reading parshat Bhaalotecha, which is the only parsha in the Torah that has a actual if it were parentheses in the middle of the Torah as it's written, and that's what we're going to be focusing on tonight. Some of the other topics discussed are Am Yisrael getting ready to finally leave Har Sinai after being camped around Har Sinai for a little less than a full year. And ultimately leaving Har Sinai and starting their trek toward Eretz Yisrael. So we will begin, if you want to follow along, as soon as my, there we go. Okay. We begin shortly before the end of Perek 10 in Bamidbar. It is actually Pasuk Lamed Gimel, verse 33 in chapter 10 in Bamidbar, which tells us the following. We've been reading about the preparation for the journey, and finally they're ready to leave. It says, Vayitzume Har Hashem. They traveled from the mountain of Hashem, Derech Shloshet Yamim, a 3-day journey. Or an equivalent to a 3-day journey. How long it took them is a good question. Varon Brit Hashem, and the ark of the covenant of Hashem, Nosea Lifnehem, traveled before them, Derech Shloshet Yamim. Again, a 3-day journey, Latur Lahem Menucha, to find for them, to search for them a place to rest. Vanan Hashem Aleim Yomam, and the cloud of Hashem was upon them during the day, Benasam Min HaMachaneh, when they traveled from the camp. Now, you can't see it if you're looking on my screen, because for some reason my font did not have a way to make a nun inverted. But if you look in most Chumashim and in the Sefer Torah, you will find in this little samach, which is a space net generally of 9 letters between paragraphs, you will find included therein in the Sefer Torah itself an inverted nun, a nun that is written backwards. Then we have these 2 psukim, which we're all very familiar with. When the ark would travel, Moshe would say, "Arise, Hashem, and let your enemies be scattered, and may you, those who hate you, run away before you." And when it would rest, he would say, "Shuva Hashem, return Hashem, Rivavot Alfei Yisrael, the 10,000s of the thousands of Israel." And then those 2 psukim are followed by a second inverted nun inside this paragraph, which actually continues to the beginning of the next line, and begins chapter 11. Chapter 11 begins with Vayiyam Kamitz Onanim. The people were complainers again. Rabbi Yoznei Hashem was a little bit upset that they were complaining. Vayishma Hashem, Vayicharpo, Hashem hears and he gets angry. Vayitivar bam eish Hashem. A fire of Hashem burned in them, and it ate at the edge of the camp. The people called out to Moshe, Moshe davened to Hashem, and the fire sank presumably into the ground. They called the name of that place Taveirah, Hashem, for the fire of Hashem had burned in them. And then we have another verse, Asafsuf Asher B'Kirbo, Asafsuf, the rabble who are in their midst, they suddenly had this great craving, Vayoshuvu, and they returned, Vayivku, and they cried, Gam B'nei Yisrael, the children of Israel also cried, Vayomru, and they said, Miachilenu Basar, and then the parsha continues with all kinds of problems of complaining about Hashem. Moshe complains to God. He doesn't know what to do with these people. He's had it up to here with them, and we move forward. But I want to focus, I said, on these 2 psukim, and the reason I quoted the psukim before and the psukim after, because we're going to see the parsha here are going to try to reconcile why this parsha is divided with these 2 backwards nuns, and what is its purpose, and what is it trying to teach us. So, as usual, we start with Rashi. So firstly, the psukim before talked about a 3-day journey, a derech shloshet yamim, a journey that normally takes 3 days. By the way, something that's derech shloshet yamim is, while we tend to think of that as time, it's not. It's a measure of distance. Just like a light year is not a measure of time, it's a measure of distance. So Derech Shloshet Yamim, Rashi says very simply, is Mahalach Shloshet Yamim. It is an ordinary journey that takes 3 days to cover for the average camp caravan traveling. However, they were able to cover it miraculously with Hashem's help in 1 day. Why? Because Hashem, and the minute they left Har Sinai, Hashem wanted to get them across that border into Eretz Yisrael as quickly as possible. Okay? Now, why one do that? That's a whole different question, but that's what Rashi says. Also, Rashi says this Aaron Brit Hashem that was traveling before the camp, unlike most of the other parshas, you assume this was the Aaron that was in the Mishkan. Rashi says, no. The Aaron Brit Hashem Nosei Lifnei, the ark that traveled in front of them during their travel in the Midbar, during this trip, this was the ark that ordinarily went out with them to war. Ubo, and what is included? Shivrei luchot munachim. This is the ark that held the broken luchot, not the second set of luchot which were deposited in the ark that Bezalel built in the Mishkan. Umaktim liftem, this ark that had the broken luchot, which, by the way, we're going to see in a minute, was the ark that Moshe built before he went up to get the second luchot. It would travel a 3-day journey in front. In other words, it traveled a 3-day journey in front of the camp at all times. Because during that time it would be flattening out and straightening out the land to make sure that the land that they were going to arrive at was suitable for them to camp at. So it would, wherever they would travel, it would take a 3-day head start, and then they would travel following it. How did the ark do that? How did the ark move? The ark was a self-propelling, self-moving, and it could travel to the end of a 3-day journey instantaneously. It was a teleporting, self-propelled ark. Okay, how it did that? Great question. None of the parashas even go into that. Okay, at least none that I saw. Okay, now by even Saharon, this is that as I said, probably one of the most familiar psukim in the Torah, apparently because we say it every time we open the Aron Kodesh to read the Torah. By Ibn Saron, Rashi says, Asa lo simaniyot milafandav milayacharav. By the way, Rashi is quoting the Gemara, which we're going to bring the whole Gemara in a minute. But it says it made for it symbols in the beginning of it and in the end of it. Lomar, to tell us that these two psukim of Vayibin Sawa and Uvnucho Yomar Ein Zemek Homo, they are written in the improper place. They really don't belong in this place in the Torah. They really belong somewhere else. They're totally out of context here. And if they're out of context, we got to understand what's going on. Why did the Torah suddenly pick these two psukim out of some context, move them here, show us that it moved them here? Why didn't it just leave it where they belong? The Lama Nichtav Khan, Rashi says very simply, Kedei lahafsik ben pur anut lepur anut. Gemara in Shabbos tells us that the reason these two psukim are inserted with the parentheses is to interrupt between one calamity or one case where Am Yisrael is straying from where they're supposed to be doing to another one. Now, all the parshim are going to have trouble with what is the problem beforehand. We understand the problem after, and it says immediately, right after Aviyam Kibit Onanim, that we're complaining. But before it says they traveled from the God mountain of Hashem, a 3-day journey. What was the problem? We're going to get into that, Bezrat Hashem, when we get into all the parshanim. Kuma Hashem. What does it mean? Kuma Hashem lefisha yamaktim lifnei malach shloshet yamim. Since the ark was a 3-day journey way ahead of them, Hayamoshe Omer Amod Amtein Lanu. When it would reach a certain point, Moshe said, "Hey, stop! Let us catch up to you because it's a good place to camp. Don't get too far away from us. Don't get a 6-day lead. We'll never catch up to you. 3-day lead, okay, but stop and let us catch up every so often." Rashi also wants to know what is the difference between Oivecha, our enemies, Misanecha, those who hate us. So he says, Oivecha hamachunasim. Oivecha means an army that's gathered to fight against you. Whereas Minas Echa are those that detest you, are Harodfim. These are ones who have already run away. So again, Hashem tells us, they should scatter if they come to fight against us. Hashem scatter them. If they want to come after us or we're chasing after them, then let them run away. So that's why they use the two different lashon. Misanecha. Now, again, it uses the term misanecha, those that hate you, Hashem. Why does it use that term? Rashi says, who are those that hate Hashem? Elu sonei Yisrael. Those are those who hate Am Yisrael. AKA what we would say call anti-Semites. Why? Yisrael. Whoever hates Am Yisrael, Soniat Misha Amar Olam, also is an enemy of Hashem. Shenemar, as it says, Umisanecha Nasru Rosh. Those, as we have a pasuk in Tehillim Perek Payimel that tells us, those that hate you have raised their heads. They've come out of hiding. Umihem, who are they? In the next pasuk in Tehillim tells us, Al Amcha Yarimu Sod. They complain against Am Yisrael, who you protect. So those who hate Hashem are those who hate Am Yisrael, Rashi says. Now Sivan Chami wants us to understand what the second Aron was, because as I said, everybody else assumes that when it says the Aron, there is one Aron, the Aron that was in the Mishkan. Rashi brought down this other Aron, and Sivan Chami just wants to explain. Perush, what does it mean? Zeha Aron hanosea lifnehem, the ark that traveled ahead of the camp, not in the midst of the camp. Hu hayotzei imahem lamilchama. This is the ark that normally went out to Am Yisrael when they went out to battle. She'aso Moshe Rabbeinu olav hashalom. That Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who built this ark. Kodim sharid aluchot hashniyot, before he went up to the mountain to get the second luchot. The Eino ha'aron she'asa B'Tzalel achar Yom Kippurim. It's not the aron that B'Tzalel made with part of the Mishkan after Yom Kippur. The achar she'otziu aluchot shniyot. The achar she'otziu aluchot shniyot me'oto haron u'usmo v'yaron she'asa B'Tzalel. After they removed the luchot, again, if we go back, if in parshat Akev, Moshe tells us what happened. He says, make this aron. When Moshe comes down with the second luchot, B'Tzalel hasn't built the aron yet. There's nowhere to put the luchot. So he puts them in the aron that he built temporarily. When B'Tzalel builds the aron, the second set of luchot get moved to the aron that B'Tzalel built, and the broken luchot, v'husnu bo shivrei luchot. And the broken luchot, the first luchot, are put in Moshe's aron. Azni sharupa, they were left in them. This was the ark that went out to them whenever they went to war. And it was also the one that traveled with them, that led the way when they were traveling. Aron, the aron that had the luchot that didn't get broken, the second set of luchot, which is the aron the B'Tzalel belt that goes in the Kodesh Kodashim when they're not traveling, it would travel in the midst of the camps. As we saw in the parsha immediately before, it talked about the first time they left Har Sinai, how they traveled, that your tribe of Yehuda and its two tribes that were with him went first. The tribe of Reuven went second. Before that went part of the Mishkan. Between those second and third camp went the rest of the Mishkan, and so forth and so on. If you read the parasha before this, the beginning of chapter 10, talks about how they traveled. Okay. Talmud Bava, let's go to that Gemara that Rashi quoted. Now, Rashi quoted this Gemara. Very simply, Tana Rabbanan, we learned the following brayta. This verse starts with Vayibin Soa. Parsha Zu, these two psukim, which is a whole paragraph. Hashem made signs before it and after it. Lomar, to tell us that this is not the place for it. And Rashi tried to explain what the reason is. As I said, he didn't really get into it. He says it's dividing it so that we shouldn't be reading two problematic or three problematic stories one after the other. Rather, this comes to divide them up so that it doesn't look like Am Yisrael was just getting into a chazaka of complaining and fetching, and that's all they did. However, that's the first opinion in the bride. So the second opinion is Rebbe Omer. Lo min Hashem uzeh. No. It has nothing to do with this. These simanim are a different reason. Ella, the reason why, it's not that it's out of place. The reason why is they should sefer chashuv hu b'fnei atzmo. These two psukim are a sefer all by itself. What does that mean? It means that we all say it at Seder night. We all count Chad Miodeh. We say how many books of the Torah? Chamisha Chumshei Torah. Well, that's not the case. There are really 7 books of the Torah. Okay? There's the there's the 5 books that we're familiar with, 4 books that we're familiar with, but Bamidbar is really 3 different books. Everything that comes before these 2 psukim, and everything that comes after these 2 psukim are separate books. So Bamidbar is really 3 different books. Take the other 4, you got 7 books. Come on, Osla. So the Gemara asks, okay, if that's the case, who is this mamar that we're going to say that follows? Had Amar Shmuel bar Nachman and Rabbi Yonatan. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman said to Rabbi Yonatan that what? Chatzma Amudei Shiva. Pasuk until Mishlei, it says that its pillars it stood on 7 pillars. There were 7 pillars that were carved out to support it. What are these 7 pillars that support, I guess, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kiviyachol, Torah? Elu Shiva Sifrei Torah. This refers to the 7 books of the Torah. Kaman, who is this following? Rebbe. That follows Rebbe's opinion, who says that these 2 psukim form their own book. What precedes them in Bamidbar is its own book. What succeeds them in Bamidbar, so Bamidbar isn't 1 book, it's really 3 books. And that's why the Torah consists of 7 books that support the world, the universe. Man hu te polygalad, Rabbi, who's the one who says that really, of course, that's not the case. There are really only 5 books. The Chamisha Chumshei Torah is exactly right. We've been right all along. Who is the Watan who doesn't agree with Rabbi? It's Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, who says, because we learned the following. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer, or Shimon Gamliel said, Asida parsha zucha te'akar mikan v'tichata b'komo. In the future, when they write the Sifrei Torah, they're going to take these 2 psukim out and put them back in the right place. We're not going to have them in this place at some point in the future. The lama katzvu kan, and why are they included here? She'lahafsik ben puraniot rishona lepuraniot shenia. To separate between 2 stories that are not to the benefit. Don't talk about good things that are happening. What are they? Parsha? Okay, so now the Gemara says, okay, I clearly understand the problems that come after it. We get directly into problems. By the way, those problems are ultimately going to lead to Chet HaMaraglim and ultimately this generation being stuck in the desert for 40 years. We all know that. But what's the first perennial? What is it that precedes these 2 psukim that's so damaging to Am Yisrael? By Yis'ume Har Hashem, it says that they traveled from the mountain of Hashem. The Amar of Chami Rachanina, what does it mean? Mehar Hashem? It really means not Har Hashem, but Mechachar Hashem. Saru Me'acharei Hashem. That they traveled, they wanted to distance themselves from Hashem's service. That's what it means. It's a drash, and we're going to see other drashim as to why this is a perennial. The Heichon Mikoma, and Rabbi Gamliel, who says it's going to ultimately be returned to its proper place. What is its proper place? Amar of Ashi, the proper place is B'Digalim. In the counting of the setting up of the camp, way back at the beginning of Bamidbar, that's where it belongs. When it discusses where the camp was set up, that's where it talks about the Aron and when they would travel. Okay, Bhaalotecha. Bhaalotecha has an interesting explanation as to. We talked about the fact that this parsha is set off by 2 backwards nuns. Asan nunim hafuchim. The Torah puts in their inverted nuns. Sheratza, why a nun? Why dafka the letter nun? Sheratza lahavir hashvatim et hayardain. Hashem wanted to get Am Yisrael to the Jordan and get them across the territory as quickly as possible. Now, why does Nun allude to the tribes? She'otiotehem Nun. If you look at the names of all 12 tribes added together, you get 50 letters. There are 50 letters in all 12 tribes. Try it sometimes. You'll find that it works. I've tried it. There's a Gemara. There's a Rashi. The Gemara in Sota talks about how there were 25 on each of the 2 stones of the apron that the Kohen wore. The 2 Shoham stones each had 25 letters on them and 6 names of 6 tribes. Total of 25 plus 25 gets you to 50. That's why it's a nun backwards, because the gematria of nun is 50. The Shvatim, Hashem wanted to take them across, but they turned around and didn't want to go back. Why? Also, he wanted to cross the Yarden, Shurachav Nun. The width of the Yarden is 50 amot. Okay, I don't know. I didn't measure it. I don't know where he measured it, but that's what he says. By the way, this is quoted from the Sifrei and Dvarim. Ella, why were they not able to fulfill all this? Why did they have to do this? Shehachet garam. that the sin caused Am Yisrael not to be able to yet go over the Yarden so quickly. And that's why we have why the Nuns, instead of being forward looking, are backward looking, because they didn't quite make it. Tam Acher. The other reason why, another opinion why the Nunim are Hafuchim, Baltur says, Kitab Shabbos Kolchit Vekodesh, the Gemara we just read, Shein Zem Komava, Kasva Kan Lafzik Ben Pronio, Rishon Lepronio, Shnia. The Asa Nunim, and why is it? So if that's the case, okay, I understand that there's got to be a separation, but why dafka the letter Nun? Why not a letter Chaf? Looks just as much like a parenthesis as a Nun. Why the letter Nun? The Asa Nunim Hafuchim Lomar, to tell us Shemekoma Lifnei Nun Parshat Lefaneh. It tells us you have to count backwards 50 paragraphs. And if you do that, you will get to the exact place that Rav Ashi just mentioned in the middle of the setting up the camp. You will see exactly where, if you go back 50 chapters, it talks about how Levium moved and the Aron moved. The ilu lo hayu hanunim hafuchim, if the nunim were not, if it wasn't the letter nun backwards, lo hayiti yotea im lifnei nun parshot lefanel o im lifnei nun la'achareh. I wouldn't know if they were misplaced by 50 portions forward going or 50 chapters backwards going. Lekach asum hafuchim, that's why they are backwards, inverted nuns, lomar, lifnei nun lefaneh. You have to go backwards 50 parshot to 50 paragraphs to find out the right place. The who, and if you count back those 50 paragraphs, you get Acher v'Nosa'o HaMoed Machaneh Alviyim b'Parshat Bamidbar Sinai, chapter 2, verse 17, Shemisham Ad Hacha Nun Parshot, because that's a total of 50 paragraphs away from where it's located now, and that's where it really belongs. That's why it's the letter Nun. Okay. Rav Chnura wants to explain a little bit more about this concept that Rashi talked about, which the Gemara talked about, two calamities. Asla Simoniot, Tilasik Ben Proniot, the Proniot, Prishona Mau Shekotov Aisu Mehar Hashem Bepasuk Dileel, Vidarshinon Bigmara Altikra Mehar Hashem, Ela Me'achar Hashem. So instead of har, both sound similar. So instead of saying they traveled from the mountain of Hashem, they traveled from away from Hashem. She'oto hayom, that same day that they left Har Sinai, saru me'acharei Hashem, they already left wanting to follow Hashem. The second one is fairly obvious. By the way, one of the reasons it does that is because Har Sinai is never called Har Hashem. It's the only place it's called Har Hashem. Everywhere else it's called Har Elokim, or Chorev, or Har Sinai. This is the only place I believe that it's called Har Hashem. And that's why we have this drash that there's Har Hashem. There's some reason, there has to be something reason they called it Har Hashem. That's what the Parshanut is based on. Ramban is going to go through the same thing. Etc. Lashon Rashi. First he quotes Rashi. V'lu pirish ranu harav. Rashi just said between one Peraniot and another. He quoted the Gemara. He didn't say what these two Peranots were. Kilonis karkan b'katu Peraniot kodem. There seems to be, before these psukim, there's nothing strange. The Lashon HaGemara Sham, the Gemara there explains, Peraniot shniyaviyam kamita onanim, as everybody agrees. The pasuk after immediately is a problem. Peraniot rishon dechsiv ha'isume har Hashem. So Rashi again and the Gemara there quotes this drash of Mehar Hashem to Me'acharei Hashem. The cuts of Harav Parshiot Perush of Sham, and Rashi explains there already within the first 3 days of traveling, Hitavu Ta'ava. They already had this great desire. They limrod Bashem. They wanted meat, and they claimed that they wanted meat really only for the sake of arguing to cause a rebellion. They were tired of following Hashem. They wanted to rebel against Moshe, and that's why they claimed they wanted meat. The Elu Divrei Tema. This doesn't make sense. I have a lot of questions about this. The fourth pasuk talks about that they wanted meat. The first pasuk says they just complained. It doesn't say what they complained about, and fire came and burned them. Ushtem smuchot, and they both appear after this chapter. Neither of them is before. The Ulai, and he says perhaps perhaps Rashi was of the opinion that those two chapters, one of Mitonanim and the other of Avu Ta'ava, were out of order, were not written in order. Remez al Rishona bi Amru Mehar Hashem, and the first one is hinted the fact that it said Mehar Hashem. Ki Shema may eight nasam chashvu lasot king, because perhaps they had already made up their mind to rebel when they were leaving Har Sinai. The hipstik because of his hashniya, and therefore the Torah interrupted and wrote the second problem first. The ein bazet tamorech. That doesn't make sense to me. Ramban says. Ella aval. He says, in reality, you want to understand what the problem was when they left Har Sinai. Inyan hamidrash hazeh matzu oto ba'agada. In the Yalkut Shimoni, we have the following thing: Shenasu mehar Sinai. What was the problem when they left Har Sinai? Bisimcha. They left it rejoicing. But, see, that was fine if they left it rejoicing. Wow, we're going to Eretz Yisrael. Yay, let's go. Let's go conquer Eretz Yisrael. That would have been fine. But that's not how they left. They left Bisimcha with the joy of, and this is one of my favorite Rashis throughout all of Torah, favorite expressions. Ketino haboreach mibeit hasefer. Like a young child running away from school. And I always think of that as last day of school. Imagine it's the last day of school. You got a long summer vacation going, yay, school is over. Hooray. That's exactly the attitude that the Medrash wants to say. That's how Am Yisrael left Har Sinai. Yay, school is over. We can leave finally. Amru, why did they want to get away from Har Sinai as quickly as possible? Shema Yarber Yitalanu mitzvot. Enough mitzvot already. Who needs more mitzvot? That's the problem. And that's what it means that they traveled from the Har of Hashem, the mountain where Hashem revealed himself. They wanted to run away. The whole reason they wanted to leave was because, let's get away. Hashem's given us too many things to do already. We don't need any more jobs and assignments. We got enough already. And that's the problem. The problem wasn't what they did. It was the way they did it. It was what they were thinking and how they were responding and why they were happy. See, again, to be happy was not the problem. The problem was, why were they happy? You know, they were happy to leave, not happy to where they were leaving to. That's the problem. The hifsik, and the reason that we have to have this interruption in between is not because of the first two. It's because this first one and the break is followed by not one more, but two more. If we hadn't had this interruption, we would have had three in a row. What happens when we have three in a row of something? It becomes a chazakah. We would have had a chazakah that we are looking for trouble. The kara hachet pur anut, and the Gemara, and Rashi quoting Gemara, uses the term pur anut, which literally means punishment, calamity for sin. Even though at this point in time, Shem didn't punish them for the fact that they ran away from Har Sinai. There's no punishment per se, but the sin happened. The Shema, but perhaps Ramban wants to end with the following possibility. Perhaps, what was the punishment? If it hadn't been for the attitude that they left Har Sinai with, they would have immediately entered Eretz Yisrael. We wouldn't have had the debacle of the Meraglim, and everything would have had a whole different path of going. Okay, so that was Ramban. Kiskuni. Even Torah. Tanya, we learned the Braita. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer Atida Parshas Zuchet Yoker Mikan V'Tichata B'Mikoma. Again, we have the same thing. That Rabbi Shimon Gamliel is the one who says ultimately this parsha is going to be restored to its proper place. And why is it written here? The place it belongs is in the Galim. Now, why did I add this? Because it says Kuma Hashem. What does it mean? Why does Moshe have to say Kuma Hashem? Because the cloud, when they would travel, the cloud, which represented Hashem's presence, would lift itself up from the Mishkan and start to move. So Hashem would say, Kuma Hashem, to symbolize that when the cloud is lifting, that's Hashem telling us that it's time for us to get up and move. Riva. Riva, by the way, just FY, is a 14th century, one of the Bhaalotecha, the latter Bhaalotecha, writes very similarly. Perish Rashi. Again, these inverted nuns are there to tell us that these two psukim are totally out of place. Parish Hayelos tell Parish Super Parish the Golem Kitani Hospital Shabbos. V'lava nichtav kan glas to get pornit lepronot. Parish Echad Shesaru me Hashem Titina Kaparech mi Beit HaSefer, that they left Hashem with the attitude of a child running away from school. The Echad mit onim onim shenit lonenu ala basar, that they complained they wanted meat to eat. The Iamarta, and now I want to ask the question. Same question that the Balaturm asked above. Why specifically the letter Nun? Yesh Lomar, and he gives one answer very simply, which is we already seen. I've even so. One, we already said that if you go back 50 parsha, which is the numerical value of Nun, you get back to the place that it really belongs. And Parshat Bamidbar Sinai, Sharia Oran Nosei Atkil V'Acharach Ohel Moed. V'dok B'Krae V'Timta Kaminyan Ulahaki Avin Hafukot Lahorot Kaminyan Nun Parshot L'Mafreya V'Im Tirtel L'Vakesh Timan L'Mafreya V'Timtaim. And he says again, same thing. If you go back and count, you will actually find that they are exactly in the right place if you count back 50 parshot. Okay. Rosh asks again the same thing. Why? What's the perennial? The Rosh combines the two parshanim we've seen already. One says Mehar Hashem is Achar Hashem. Katina Kabarech Beit HaSefer. Kach Asu Yisrael. Amru. The reason they wanted to run away. Shema wrote Lahabrit Lanu Torah Acheret U'Mitzvah Acheret. We've got one Torah. Hashem is going to give us another Torah with a whole other set of mitzvah. Ma'asu, what did they do to when they ran away from Har Sinai? Chazru lachoreim shmona masot. They went backwards toward Mitzrayim, 8 journeys. HaKadosh Baruch Hu nifra lahem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu punished them. Umetu mehem harbe, and many of them died. V'zeu ha'poraniot shekatuv, and that's why it uses the term poranut. That the Gemara there uses that in reality the Rosh goes a step further. Everybody else says, well, they weren't punished. Ramban says maybe the punishment was that they didn't get to go into Eretz Yisrael. But Rosh says no, they were actually punished because they didn't just think about doing something. They did. They went backwards. They started going back to Mitzrayim. Hashem ultimately punished them, and they had to return. Okay, Kleyakar. Yesh Bechazal. There's an opinion in the Gemara that we've already seen above. That there aren't 5 books of Torah, there were 7 because these 2 will form their own book. He says, that's really strange that we should have a book in the Torah that's only 2 psukim long. And the thing is really strange. We know the reason we have the Torah is for mitzvot. In these 2 psukim, if this is a whole book of the Torah, there's no mitzvah listed. There's not even a hint of a mitzvah listed. So how can I say that it's part of the Torah? If the whole part of Torah is teaching Torah, that we're learning the mitzvot, then how can we say this is a book of the Torah if there are no mitzvot in it? It doesn't make sense. So he's going to give you a nice answer. And of course he's going to give you an answer. I can't ask a question without answering it, right? I'm going to try to give you an answer. The Omer, and I'll say, you know what mitzvah is included in these 2 psukim? Shel mitzvah periya or revia asa sefer b'fnei atzma. Kadosh Baruch Hu decided that to teach us the mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply, we need our own book of 2 psukim. How does what we just read by even our own have anything to do with being fruitful and multiply? 1 minute. Keep a mitzvah is that. Firstly, the mitzvah of be fruitful and multiply. Talui kiyum ha'olam. The whole existence of the world is based on procreating, having a next generation. Without a next generation, there's no world needed. We don't continue. The Goren Hashraat Shechina and birth, having a next generation, causes Hashem's presence to rest on us. Ki Osha Amru Chazal, because the Gemara in Yevamot says, Kol mi she'eno osek bepriya urvia, whoever does not involve himself in procreation, having of children, Gorim Lishtina Shetistalek Yisrael, causes the presence of Hashem's presence, to leave Am Yisrael. And where's the proof that the Gemara brings there in Yevamot? Shenemar, our pasuk in these two psukim, Uvnucho Yomar, when the Aron would come to arrest, what would Moshe say? Shuvo Hashem Rivavot Alfei Yisrael. Rivavot, the 10,000s of the thousands of Israel. What does that have to do with giving birth and having Hashem rest his presence? Shenemar Uvnucho Hashem Rivavot. Melamed, this teaches us she'ein hashchina shora bepachot mishnei alafim ushnei revot miYisrael. To have Hashem's presence rest on Am Yisrael, we need a minimum of 2,000s, because alfei is plural, thousands plural, and 10,000s plural is another 20,000. You have to have a minimum of 22,000 Jews in order for Hashem to rest his presence on us. By the way, we had this before when we talked about how many Levium there were, that there were 22,000 Levium. That exactly 22,000 for Hashem to rest to be considered a large enough congregation for Hashem to rest his presence. Hooray! Now, what does that have to do with 22,000? What does that have to do with being fruitful and multiply, causing what? Not being fruitful and multiply, causing Hashem to not rest his presence on Am Yisrael. Hooray! Imagine that the Jewish population had gone down to 21,999. It was one less than 22,000 necessary. This guy who doesn't get married and doesn't want to have kids, because if he'd had a kid, would have been 22,000. So his not having a kid caused Hashem's presence not to be able to rest on Am Yisrael. Not only is that, but how important is Pru Revu? This is the first mitzvah that Adam Arishon is commanded, is Pru Revu Miluet Haaretz. Right after it says God creates man in chapter 1 of the Torah, he says, be fruitful and multiply. This is the first mitzvah. So too, Hashem makes a book of only 2 psukim to teach us the importance of this mitzvah of Pru Revu. Lomar, to teach us, that from this pasuk we learn that we need 22,000. And from the fact that we need to have a minimum of 22,000 people for Hashem to rest his presence on Am Yisrael, every Jew will be cognizant and be very watchful to make sure they fulfill their part of this mitzvah, so that there should be 22,000 Jews. And the proof of that is, what were they complaining about according to the Midrash? They were complaining about who they could marry and who they couldn't marry. That was one of the complaints, according to one Midrash. So that's, he says, is proof that here's the whole point. The whole focus of these 2 psukim is to teach us the importance of raising a family, having kids, and being part of propagating the human race, and of course the Jewish people. Okay. Malbim. Ibn Zohara. The ark travels, they leave Har Sinai. When they're leaving Har Sinai, their destination is to immediately enter Eretz Yisrael. And Hashem promised them, had they gone in immediately to Eretz Yisrael, they would not have had to have any wars. Hashem would travel in front of them, that all of the enemies would disappear, they would be destroyed, and Am Yisrael would have entered Eretz Yisrael. That is why the Aron, we could tangibly see the presence of Hashem upon it, traveled at the head of the column, not at the back, not in the middle. To lead the way, to drive away all the enemies. As we see him in Moshe recounts this whole story in Sefer Dvarim 40 years later, he tells us that Hashem told us it's time to leave Har Sinai, it's time to get up and go and inherit Eretz Yisrael. He just says go and inherit Eretz Yisrael. He doesn't say go and conquer Eretz Yisrael. Why? Perish Rashi al Divrei Chazal she'amar lei Moshe tells Am Yisrael as they're about to leave Har Sinai, she'ein tzarich lahem lilachem, ki Hashem yilachem lachem, rak lalachet v'lareshet et haaretz. All he says is alei reish, go up and inherit the land. He doesn't say go up and conquer the land and inherit it. Why? Because Hashem is going to conquer the land for them. Miraculously, they're not going to have to raise a single weapon. Therefore, Moshe tells Hashem, who's going with the Aron, Lo rishyo shvei haaretz. What does he say? By Kuma Hashem yafutzu oivecha. Scatter your enemies. Let them all run away. Okay, that's what he says. Now, he goes further. He says, Rashi also says, Yesh hebdel bein oyev uvein sonei. There's a difference between an oyev and a sonei. These are two different words for somebody who hates you. She oyev, what's the difference between an oyev, oivato giluya? An oyev is somebody who openly threatens you. He openly accepts the fact that he's an anti-Semite, kill all the Jews. I'm going to go out and fight the Jews and kill them all. Like a Haman, for example, a Hitler who says, I'm going to go out and kill the Jews. When Hashem arises, these oivim, these enemies who are coming to fight us will be scattered. The Hasonim, however, the enemies who are hidden, they don't come out to fight against us. Rak, Shomrim Sina Belev, they hide and they keep their hatred hidden. The Heimlo Yadkilu Klal, they won't start up, Lachin Tzva Milchama, to start a war, to have an army. Rak, Yanusu, Takef, they will immediately run away. Like there was one of the 7 nations, the Girgashi, that decided, we don't want any part of being in Eretz Yisrael. You want it, it's yours. We're going away. We're living somewhere else. Okay. Rav Shamshon Fall Hirsch. We're going to close with Ibn Zaharon. That's a very, very interesting thing here. Okay. We've already established the whole order of Sefer Bamidbar. Bepetach Dvareinu Li'el Perek Chet. Sipur ha'hitpatchut shel Am Yisrael hufsak mishmot lamedal in Kiddush Brit Hashem le'achached ha'egel. Telling us the story, explaining the story that happened to Am Yisrael. When we reached the end of Shemot, we talked about putting up the Mishkan, and then we stopped and interrupted for the whole book of Vayikra, which was all the laws that we needed to know now that we built the Mishkan. If you go through all of Sefer Vayikra, very little history is mentioned there. There's very little of what happened to Am Yisrael. However, now that we finished the counting at the beginning of Bamidbar, we are going to pick up the story, basically. Now, the Torah is going back to the story to tell us what happened to Am Yisrael after the Mishkan was built and set up, and they inaugurated it, and they had all these wonderful things going on. With the building of the Mishkan, all of the mitzvot that Hashem needed to give us in Har Sinai are complete. Now, had Am Yisrael reached the level that was required for fulfilling the Torah, if we were ready, if we had been ready at this point in time, we would have had a completely different history, the Jewish people. Pshuta yoter, would have been a lot simpler. Why? Mehar Hashem, hayunosi miyad la'aretz Hashem. Immediately from Har Sinai, they would have traveled directly to Eretz Yisrael, k'dei l'kayim et haTorah ba'aretz, to fulfill all that they just learned in Eretz Yisrael. Mikdash haTorah, the Am haTorah, the Beit HaMikdash, and Am Yisrael, hayumagiyim ba'aretz, they would reach Eretz Yisrael, l'ma'alotam ha'elyonah, to this high level of spirituality that they were supposed to reach, umi'irim l'kol hamim ad l'merachot, and they would have enlightened all of the nations from near and far. Atah, he says, and Rav Shursh, you can hear him sighing as he says this. Atah zeh rachok rak chazon li'acharit hayamim. This has now become just a vision, a prophecy for the end of time. However, historia enushit, human history, kimoha, historia hayudit, like Jewish history, haytamit pachat b'derech shoneh, would have followed a completely and entirely different course. Okay, ulam. But, however, Jewish people weren't yet ready to reach that level. Habsukim habaim, even in the immediately following psukim, they already bring us into the middle of the Jewish camp, the camp of Am Yisrael. And we have a long litany now, one after the other, of missteps. And ultimately it's going to get us into not this week's reading, but next week's reading of the Chet of the Meraglim. And what will happen in the end, it will become clear to all of us, that this entire generation was not worthy to enter Eretz Yisrael, the land where Torah is meant to be lived. The Yerushat Haaretz, and the inheritance of the land, L'me'od Hashanim HaKrovot, for the next 100 years that would follow when they finally did get in, Haytarak Chelek Me'tkufat HaChinuch Shel HaHistoria HaYisraelit, was only a small portion of the entire history of Am Yisrael's education. The whole purpose of Jewish history is to educate the Jewish people to reach the level we were supposed to be at. We had reached for a second at Har Sinai. Then, of course, came Chet HaEgel. And now, as we leave Har Sinai a little bit later, everything falls apart for that generation, basically. And even that limited for period of time that they're going to be in Eretz Yisrael, continuing the educative process, couldn't begin until that generation had died out. The Gadol Dor Chadash Bimkomo, and a new generation had been raised in its place. Hapasuk Hakodem, the pasuk before, Mahava Efo Chatach Chashuv, Mamash Nekudot Nefanev HaHistoria Hayudit. The two verses before clearly show the beginning of that completely different change in direction of Am Yisrael's history. Gidol Mizu, larger than that. Pasuk Lamed Daled Nechshav Sof Sefer. It's considered by some the end of a book. That's why I said, why is it three different books? Book one is when Am Yisrael is ready to go into Eretz Yisrael, but the second, and these two psukim interfere. And then after that, we find that Am Yisrael is not ready to go into Eretz Yisrael and will not go into Eretz Yisrael until 40 years have passed. So you see that already why Bamidbar is, according to this opinion, why it's three different books. Because beforehand is one potential history, the other is a very different potential for history. So the Parak Haba is Tchilat Sefer Chadash, Psukim Shebeinehem, and these two psukim that we're talking about inside the Inverted Nuuns, Heim Bibechinat Sefer Chashuv Hu Bifnei Atzmo. They're their own book. Ulefikach, and therefore Heim Muskarim Hayidei Simaniot Milamalo Namato. They're closed off by the two nuns before and after. The Nimtza Shaloch Hamisha Sfarim Bilvad Nitnu LaMoshe. Moshe did not receive 5 books of the Torah. Ela B'Omek Hadavar. When we really look into it, Mispar Sifrei Torah Hu Shiva. There are really 7 books of the Torah. But the whole point, I think, of all of this that we've seen right now is very, very simple lesson, very, very powerful and simple lesson. That when we look at things in a positive way, we can move mountains. When we look at things in a negative way, it's the mountains that are going to move and interfere with us. And I really think the real lesson of these two psukim and where they're located and how they're located is really to teach us this very, very powerful lesson. When we look at things from the perspective of we are Hashem's people, when we do what Hashem wants, anything is possible and everything is possible. And we have to make it happen by having that level of trust in Hashem, belief in Hashem, and being willing to, as we originally said back at Har Sinai of Nasev and Ishma, we will do it. We gave Hashem as a blank check. Whatever you tell us to do, we're going to do. We're ready to do it. When we reach that level of trust in Hashem, of following Hashem, that's when we will be able to reverse this detour of history, get back on track of becoming an Or LaGoyim and bringing in the Geula Shleimim Me'er Yameinu. Thank you all for joining. I open it up for questions, comments, or feedback at this time. Gershon has a question first.
What percentage of we qualifies?
What percentage of we Am Yisrael qualifies? That's a question that there's only one entity that can answer that, and that's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I mean, if we go back to the Midrash in Mitzrayim, that tells us that only 20% of the Jews left Egypt, or another Midrash says only 2% of the Jews left Egypt. Obviously, and there are other places in history where we find Hashem tells the Navi, look, most of the people aren't going to make it. There's going to be a small remnant of believers who may make it, but how many of Am Yisrael will ultimately make it? I don't have any clue. There's no way of knowing. There's no way of measuring until we have 20/20 hindsight to count them and figure out how many they were. But clearly the objective is to get as many as possible. The real objective is to get all of Am Yisrael on board. That's our real mission. That's the mission of Am Yisrael, is that we should all be on board with the program. When we're not all on board with the program, we have problems, and we have people disappearing, right and left, and while the anti-Semites can't destroy us, we can destroy ourselves if we're not careful enough. Again, we say it at the Seder night. We say V'hisha Amda, that it's only the fact that Hashem has promised us that we'll survive, that we've managed to survive despite ourselves. I think sometimes, again, Baruch Hashem, there are always those that are trying to get people back on track, trying to get people straightened out. And when will it happen? It can happen today. It can happen tomorrow. It can happen any day. But as I said, it's a tough road to get to, and to convince people to understand that we, the Jewish people, have a significant mission, and we can achieve it if we really go out and do it. So it's up to us. Ball's in our court. HaKadosh Baruch Hu always says, the ball's in our court. We can make it happen. It's just how do I, as an individual, do something? That's a whole different set of things. What we can do individually to try to reach out to others and help bring that time closer. Okay. Any other questions, Jackie?
Can I ask?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I've heard before about the Aron Kodesh and all its bits and pieces being very, very heavy, and how on earth did they carry it? And that was a miracle that they managed to carry it, because it kind of carried itself. Yes. But now you're saying it's a supersonic road roller.
No, I get.
Where do you get that from?
Let's put it this way. The Aron, again, the Medrash says, the phrase the Medrash uses, Aron nosei et nosav. The Aron carried its bearers. So how it did that, and whether it was visible to anybody as an open miracle, whether it was a hidden miracle, I don't know. All I'm saying is that the Midrash is telling us that, first and foremost, these are two different Arons. You have to remember, one is going together with the Mishkan. The other seems to be this one that Moshe built that goes in front of the camp, at least according to Rashi's opinion. By the way, there are those that say there was no such thing as two Arons. There was one Aron. But as I said, don't know. But the reality is that how the Aron moved was clearly not naturally. Let's put it that way. That far I will go. How that miracle occurred and how people viewed it, I can't answer for you. Okay? Does that help?
A little, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you all for joining. Have a good rest of the